call the work session to order. Up first, we have the fire station and public services building and maintenance project.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. So welcoming Joel Dunning here with Old Architects and Engineers. I think, Reed, have you met Joel before? Reed Welch,
no.
Council member. I think you've
We
met.
have met.
Yep. So in March of 23, the City Council accepted a proposal from Wold to take a look at some improvement and maintenance projects related to the fire station and public services. Initially, that scope involved a new public services kind of a storage building, a building addition to the fire department for turnout gear for health and safety reasons. Chief Trimble has kind of gone over the pros related to segregating the turnout gear from the apparatus bay, but is here tonight if we want to get into some more detail. Then a roof replacement and rooftop HVAC units at that facility at 801 Jonathan Carver Parkway, along with a new self-storage facility. We got some preliminary estimates for that scope of work, primarily related to the building addition for the turnout gear and the public services storage building, and the combination of that with not being able to secure land for the storage part of the public services building kind of created a space for a pause on that initial scope of the project. So as you know, we're looking and continuing to look for options for land for a future kind of public services building, but kind of transition from maybe a short-term building project to a long-term building project. So Joel and his team are helping us with that, but still kind of focused on some of the functions of our original scope, which is, and I noted this in the memo, fire station renovation project. So using the existing space within the building, which provides some opportunities to alleviate some cost constraints that are related to a building expansion, primarily with stormwater treatment. But then also we still need to look at the roof replacement and HVAC rooftop unit replacement on the existing building. And so Joel, along with our staff team, has kind of worked to develop some concepts. And so we're here tonight to review those concepts. You can see kind of a preliminary budget. We're looking at funding these improvements through a capital improvement bond. And so Lynn's going to be taking us through that process, which involves a public hearing and the establishment of a capital improvement plan, which is ironically the same funding mechanism that we use for the City Hall project, so which Joel and his team helped design the very room that we're sitting in. So tonight I've invited Joel to kind of come in and review their architectural services going forward to complete this project, and then primarily to review the concepts related to the building renovation project inside the fire station. So with that, Joel, do you want to start with this sketch? Or
Sure, let me start the plan. So to avoid, I'll just start off, to avoid the cost of footings and exterior envelope and so on, as we decided to restart the exploration of how to achieve the separation. Can you zoom on a little bit more?
Sure.
So the existing apparatus, turnout gear is stored in the apparatus room on that wall and all the lockers. And so it's just open environment. And we were planning on doing an addition about 12 feet wide on the south end of the building there on the left. We refocused, looked at, there's an area here, there's a stair right on the inside wall, there's no overhead door, there's no pull through in that first bay. And there's equipment that's stored on the floor. It's open floor space, it's certainly equipment that's used. It's not like there's floor space, let's just throw stuff there. It's important things. But thought it was a better use of space to develop a turnout gear locker room that would then be enclosed. So we'd take down part of the existing wall of the center core, create a larger room. So firefighters during a call would flow into this secure or cleaner space. There'd be 28 new lockers around the perimeter, which are they're about 24, I think, 30 inches wide. Kind of like an open, if you see, not quite as elaborate as the Vikings, but kind of big open lockers so it makes it really easy for the firefighters to put on their gear, grab stuff as they're getting ready for a call. So those newer, wider ones would go around the perimeter. The existing ones that are along the wall here would be placed in the middle in an island, so there's a little bit of an overflow for excess gear. And then we maintain a door so that there's the ability to flow from the training area through the kitchen to the turnout gear and out to the apparatus bay. And then 2 other spaces that get built out into the apparatus bay, which are pretty critical to keep away from the environment of the apparatus bay, but currently are in this zone, is the SCBA filling room. So it's where all the tanks and the breathing apparatus are cleaned and stored. And then a gear wash and decontamination room where when they get back from using the equipment, especially if it's been for a structure fire, they have a place to strip down everything, to clean it, to make sure that their equipment is going to be safe to use again. So there's doors again that connect from those spaces, connect internally so that after stuff's cleaned, they can deploy and store everything properly, but also so that people can get in and out from the apparatus space. The thought, I think, Callie, correct me if I'm wrong, but the thought was that some of the equipment that's stored here in the short term could be put on pallet racking and other things where the turnout gear is currently located.
Yeah, most of it's on rollable racks, and we'd be looking at maybe purchasing 1 or 2 more rollable racks, so it would easily be able to move, but nothing like pallet racking, but we would have enough space to do that.
It's kind of a swap, and those things are things that could be out in the apparatus bay. They are today, and they're acceptable. I will point out that we're planning no space above this. So there is, the whole mezzanine level that's up above this existing center core. We're planning on the walls that surround these new additions going all the way up to the structure. So there'll probably be block walls up to a certain point where they might get damaged or have water sprayed on them or something like that. And then at a certain point, either sheetrock over a lid so that it's separated, or have sheetrock walls that go straight up to the underside of the roof deck to then provide the false ceiling laid in, like in this room, on the top of those 3 spaces so that the environment is separate.
Can you explain that a little bit better? So when we walk in that, so it'll only be half the height of the building, is that, of the interior?
It'll go from, when you're standing in the apparatus bay, I guess there's 2 choices that it could be. It's either half the height, and there will be kind of like some sort of sheetrock soffit ceiling over those spaces, or it'll be walls that just extend all the way up to the roof deck. We'll do a cost analysis to figure out which is most affordable.
Okay, so if we're worried about water, I don't think sheetrock is probably our best option.
It'd be up high though. I don't think it's mostly the water that's brought in by vehicles.
Well, where do you, washing trucks and stuff
We
in
wash
there?
our trucks in there.
In there, so I don't think I realize it might be high, but I'd rather not start off with something that might get mold, so maybe there's an alternative to sheetrock.
Yep, we can look at different options. I just am saying we're not,
Sure.
we always could go all the way up to the roof with block, but that'd be more
Right.
expensive, and so we'd look at a less expensive alternative.
Okay.
All of the effort to contain the gear and outgassing, there's a door to the kitchen. Is that okay to have a door to the kitchen from that area?
The 3 new rooms are considered clean rooms.
Okay.
And so a connection to the kitchen is fine because the kitchen would also be clean. It's the apparatus bay that has the diesel fumes and the equipment that might be coming back from a structure fire that might be contaminated.
I'm assuming that's for ease, if you're in the training room, that you can run through the kitchen and get your gear and get on a truck.
Correct.
Okay.
So a little background to on how we arrived at that. There was an option that we, as a team, looked at through Wold's help that placed a mezzanine on top of this area, which, close to doubled the cost, around 800 some thousand. And the calculus on kind of this concept is that with the thought that the city is looking for a long-term solution to the public services department in 1 to 3 years, however that process rolls, is that when public services moves out, the fire department would then take over the north half of the building. And then at some point in the future, then there would be a right size of this building for the fire department specific use. So if that's adjusting some of the bays on the north side, or as we grow, we might need to get into some more permanent quarters for like duty crews, etc. But the thought as a team was to like, let's get done what we need to get done for the turnout gear, get public services into their new space, and then recognize and assess what our space needs and uses are at the time when the fire department takes over the entire building. Is that inaccurate?
Yep.
So what was, right, what are we removing, or what are we, not saying losing, but what's shrinking, or?
Basically, these two rooms, or those two functions, are pretty much back here right now.
Okay.
But it doesn't work, they need direct
More
access out to
space.
the apparatus bays, and so it doesn't really work to build out the new gear storage room in front of them. So we've designed it so that it can be stretching long and skinny back into the existing space, and then keeping frontage of those out to the apparatus bay.
Gosh,
And what do you park there, or Callie, right?
There's a light tower that we're gonna be coming to you guys with auctioning off, as it's no longer used because of the 2 new apparatus that we have got light towers on top of them. So it's kind of just a piece of equipment that's sitting there, and like we were talking about, some hose and stuff like that, that's on movable racking that we can place along that wall. And then along with that locker room, we did build it out for future, so like more staff eventually down the road, it would accommodate that, along with 2 sets of gear for everybody as a future direction that we'll be looking at. So that would accommodate that too, with the 30-inch lockers and the reuse of the old lockers that are in there.
okay, that makes sense.
How
And
about
then
some
we-
of the,
I'd say you didn't have a compelling need for the extra space above to justify the cost, right? Again, with thinking eventually we'd have the rest of the building.
It's a pinch point, but I think we've seen like 1 to 3 years down,
Okay.
1 to 3 years we can support it, or 1 to
Okay.
4 years, however long it, we understand that with these types of things, some things could get extended or not, but, you know, for that cost, say, you know, that it would cost the city, we just didn't feel that value added.
Okay, good.
How about some of the other rooms? I know that's not in scope for this, but just, first, do the bathrooms have showers?
Yes.
And then the size of the kitchen seems really small. But like, do you feel like the kitchen's just right, too small, too big? Just trying to anticipate in the future too.
Yeah, I think, you know, primarily when you're looking at like a duty crew or a duty, you know, overnight stay, you'd be looking at like a 4 to 5 person shift for the city of Carver, so I think that kitchen would accommodate those needs.
Is there a kitchen upstairs too?
There is not.
There's not, okay. And then how about the bathrooms? Are like people waiting in line or that's, okay.
Good question.
I think that if I could just look out to the future a little bit, if the city went to a duty crew model that you wanted to build out bedrooms or, you know, dorm, sleeping rooms and a living space, and the mezzanine could be available for all of that. But this is more of the volunteer fire station model, that once you go to the expense of building out those sleeping rooms and the living area and day space for a full-time crew or duty crew that's on site, you probably also build out more permanent bathrooms and other things upstairs as well.
Well, that was like the exercise that we're kind of doing right now, was a little bit what we did as a team in some of our meetings with Wold, of like, well, you could do this to the kitchen, or you could create a central corridor to that space so you could connect the first to the second. And all of a sudden we just started seeing like, well, this scope is really kind of getting large. And so would you rather do that once you have like the whole space and figure out how you're gonna work within it, and you know, what rooms and where you'd want the wash bay and where you'd store this? And so it just felt like a bigger exercise and harder to do without having the space, and frankly more expensive and more time to like then ramp up the community and the council to like understand that on something that probably wouldn't occur for construction for 4 to 5 years. It just seemed like a heavy lift, but there are a lot of like nooks and crannies in this space to look at and talk about and discover for the future needs of the department for the next 25, 50 years, so.
So anticipating that there will be additional changes to this building, is that pretty, like, that will stay?
That will stay.
Okay. We won't need to amend it in 5 years or 10 years. That will always be the clean room for turnout gear.
Correct.
Okay. Boy, it feels like we've been talking about this for a long time, but let's get it done. Any other questions, concerns?
Can we just, can you shift or transition, Joel, to your work on the rooftop units and the roof, and then just some basics on Wold's work within that process and what the council can expect. And council, this is something that we, with your kind of general support tonight, bring to your April 1st meeting to get approval to get Wold started on plans and specifications.
Yeah, it's an ideal time to consider those maintenance upgrades, the roof replacement and the air handling unit replacements that are scheduled for the building. The roof is at its life and has done a good job, but there's some advantages to thinking about them all at once. Certainly we're enclosing more space, and as we're looking at replacing the air handlers, we'll want to take a look and see if we need to take the one area, the air handler that may be serving the central area, and expand it, because we're expanding the footprint slightly. There's some structural changes then potential with the swapping out of an air handler to a slightly bigger one. So we'll be looking at the roof structure. We also look at roof structure when we do the roof, also when we do a re-roofing. There's newer energy codes out there that say that there has to be a minimum thickness of insulation on any re-roofing you do. And the downside of, I mean, it's great for the environment. The downside is that by having less heat escape the building, snow tends to pile up more. And so there's more of a load on the structure. So we need to go in and analyze to make sure that that snow that will be accumulating will also be not collapsing the roof. But that's also a great time to take a look at those calculations of the roof and look at solar. I know that was something that we did a preliminary look at. Found before we kind of put the last effort on hold, our structural engineer had taken a cursory look at the structure, found that there was about 3 to 5, I think it was, 3 to 4 pounds per square foot of excess capacity. We might need that for the snow load that's being added to the roof, but we might also be able to switch from a ballasted roof where there's gravel up there holding down the rubber membrane to a fully adhered membrane. That'd be a choice we could bring to the council. It's a little more expensive roof, but you don't have all the weight of the rock, so that frees some capacity up. And so anyway, there's some potential for solar, and it all works together is what I'm getting at. That you wouldn't want to do just the air handlers and then all of a sudden a year later have to replace the air handler to upsize it. And then all of a sudden redo the structure and then do the, it all works together, so there's some benefit. We would be going through the schematic design, truncated schematic design, because we've, from our previous efforts and from this exercise, gotten pretty far along. But going through a design development phase where we're adding detail and engineering all the systems and then developing the construction documents and blueprints and bringing it to the city for approval to go out to bid.
So we've talked about solar before and exploring this is the largest roof surface area we have for that. That would really seem to need to be right at the beginning, because if you got to make a decision what kind of roof membrane you need, don't we have to make decisions on solar before we get started with that?
I defer to Joel.
Yeah, I think that we would very early in the process finish the analysis on the roof and what sort of decisions might be made, need to be made, and also what sort of cost impacts there might be. Bring that back to council before we go further.
Have you done any work to obtain grant money for solar?
We have worked with our with clients on different grants. It's mostly right now There is, the newest one is the federal income tax is now available to cities, federal tax credits.
Okay.
So we've been helping our clients realize that they can get 30% savings on, just like if you're a homeowner putting in solar, you can file a tax credit for 30% of the value of that. That's now open to cities and counties and other people who normally don't file taxes. You're allowed to, seems strange, but as a city, you're allowed to file a federal tax to get that money back.
Do we, and I don't know, I'm asking. Those type of grants, what's available? Does it just pay for the hardware? Does it allow us to spend money to retrofit the roof to accept a solar panel? And who does the work to investigate that? What responsibility do we have to start looking into what's available?
Well, Joel and I connected with this, and they have a team that's kind of dedicated and specializes in that.
Okay.
So I would probably rely on that. I mean, I think there's probably quite a bit of like different resources, and depending upon what you do in your location, I think Karen's got a connection into that, and we have connections through Green Step Cities. So it's probably a little bit of a joint effort depending upon what the scope is, and then in turn the council want to move forward. And some of this is just from past practice when you're investigating grants. Sometimes they want to know what you intend to do, and there are certain thresholds on price and cost. So the idea, in my usual circumstances, would have to be a little bit more fully developed in order to get some better numbers.
I'm just worried about architectural design and all of this work that needs to start going forward, and then we get too far down the road where we've built ourselves out of the ability to do this. What's our appetite to explore this? And these discussions kind of happened before I was really part of the council, but what is our appetite for
Do we
this?
have a ballpark initial of what installing solar out there would cost? Because this is a $13 million project to start with, so what would we be adding?
13. What are you looking?
Am I looking at the right thing?
That's the old numbers, right?
Oh,
Oh, new building with one,
estimated cost for fire station, roof replacement, HVAC units.
1.3.
1 point.
What did I say?
13
13.
million?
Oh, I'm sorry, I went 1.3. I better get my math is quick. Sorry, 1.3.
Your eyes still dilated?
They are actually. Okay, so anyways, we're at 1.3 already, so what additionally is this gonna cost? Or if we were to add solar into this mix?
I can't speculate on what the structural improvements might need to be to the building. The upcharge of the roof to go to a fully adhered roof instead of a ballasted, and the cost of solar, that together you're probably talking about, I think it would be about $10 to $15 a square foot. I'm mixing up things. It's 5 to 10 for the roof. For the solar, that's a KWDC number, not a square foot number. So I need to look at it. But
Are we talking hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands?
to fill the roof, yeah, you could spend a couple $100,000 to fill the roof with solar.
I don't want to belabor this too much more. In the projects that are happening now, so in the 2020s, what is the ROI time? It used to be 20 years. I don't think it is anymore. What is it in the?
It's around 8 years right now.
Okay,
You asked about appetite.
yeah.
I think this is the time, right? If we're putting on a new roof, if we're putting on new air handlers, we're making the most changes that that roof has seen since the building was put up. I think this is the time to look into it and figure that out. What is the ROI? What is the risk? What are the benefits? I like the idea of going solar, but I also like the idea of putting together a fiscally sound and responsible
Yeah.
And it
project.
could
But I
vary.
don't know that it won't necessarily be if
Right.
it's solar. I don't know.
If it's an 8-year ROI and the lifespan is 30 years and maybe it
Yeah.
extends the life of the roof, because you have another surface up there.
And that number is on a new building that's designed with the roof
Yeah.
and the roof structure in place. And if you have to spend another $100,000 to shore up the roof, then that greatly impacts
Right
that
back into
ROI.
it, right.
I'm not ready to say no yet.
Okay.
I think we should explore it.
I just want to be sure that we explore it before we go too far down the road, where we build ourselves out of it.
But I think that's why we
Okay.
have, that's why we're
Fine.
having this meeting. I think
Yeah.
we're all clear that we want to explore it, and maybe John gets 2 steps into it and says, this just isn't gonna work for whatever reason. Or maybe we end up doing it, but we're not gonna know unless we put a little bit of research into it.
And the same, I want to explore it.
And for how much is actually needed for that, like, to sustain that building too, right? Because we don't have to fill, I don't know a ton about solar, but, I mean, are we looking to like make buku bucks back on for the city? I mean, I don't know how it goes back into the power grid and you, yeah, so,
Yeah,
I
there are-
mean, when you said we could fill the whole roof, great, but is that over what we would need anyways? Because if we're crediting back in at zeros,
I think it's just a credit from the power company and power generation in general.
right, but if it
It's
just,
specific to the building.
right.
They
Oh,
do,
okay.
there is a tendency that Excel wants solar installations to match what sort of usage each building has, because they don't want people to go into the business of making power plants.
Mhm.
That's their job. And so,
Sure.
they do, I mean, there is a cap at 1 megawatt. I don't think we're there. I don't think we'd have enough roof area to do that, yeah.
Okay, okay.
But you do get into some situations where if you have an excessive amount, you have to go through special permitting with Excel.
And just as it, like this, this is in MVEX territory, Minnesota Valley Electric Cooperative, so I have a contact for them, we can get connected with them.
Yeah, I guess my concern is if we have to upgrade the roof structure, that seems like that's going too far, but as long as we can, you know, like you said, switch roof materials and it all structurally sound, I think it's
Mhm.
definitely worth investing in, or investigating.
Yeah, and also knowing that the city might have a public works building coming soon with a large roof area as well, that could be designed to accommodate solar
Sure.
from the first
That's
place.
Yeah.
What kind of turnaround time do you need, Joel, to get maybe some initial feedback for the council?
Well, my goal would be as part of the conclusion of schematic design, so it'd be about a month or so.
Okay.
I would think.
Where we would be able to talk about solar.
Bring back some actual numbers and calculations of the cost impact and return on investment and so on.
Is just thinking of a choice the council might want to make, do you want to, so there's a public hearing notice that we have to do related to the capital improvement on that sets like a max budget. Do you want to put another 250,000 in just in case you want to move forward? Because then you would, to your point, Eric, you might arbitrarily be confining yourself by a budget. If, you know, if we don't provide that space, that doesn't mean you have to borrow that much, but it gives you the ability to borrow it should you
Right.
choose to.
I think we should.
Yeah, I don't want to lock ourselves out. I mean, it's not a science project for me. It's
No.
not
Yeah,
a
no,
public
no.
relations project. If there is a real ROI to do it, and it makes sense, that's what drives us.
Yeah. I think it would be good to have the
Cost.
salary cap, budget cap, if you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah,
I don't know that I'm willing to spend $250,000 on solar, but it's not a commitment to doing that. So it's just giving us some wiggle room, but if we decided that's the path we wanna go down, it's easier to set ourselves up with a higher number in that hearing and then borrow less than.
thank you.
Okay.
Right, I have one more question. So what, those federal funds that we had at one point for this, what happened with that?
That's in our budget for this.
It is
Yep.
included in that, okay. I didn't see it when I was reading it, but it says,
I'll pull it up here. Well, it's not in this budget, but it's in the capital improvement plan. I thought I just wrote a memo on that for something, but we haven't accounted for it. It's like
I think it's in that.
Is that the money for the
175,000.
turnout gear?
it's 175.
It says cash for fire station
Yeah.
edition, is that
Well,
what that
that's-
means?
Yeah, that's the money.
Okay.
That's the it's state money. It's that state public safety.
Oh, that one, okay, okay.
I did have it in there.
I just didn't know what cash for was.
Down in myself.
Perfect.
Just wrote a memo about it.
All right, thanks.
All right,
Yeah, I just in general, it looks like it's a great way to make progress without having a new building. Good job for the team to get something quickly and relatively on budget.
I make no new fire station like the Chaska Hills that we're getting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chaska Harold.
Yeah, thanks.
That was fun.
Any other questions, concerns, comments? All right, well, thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
All right, up next, sign ordinance reviews.
Have a good evening.
Thanks.
All right, I wish I could say this on, that it's just me, but it's me and Dave. We're gonna have a riveting conversation about our sign ordinance. So, we're going to do a review of our current ordinance. Dave is going to give a legal review. Councilmember Pershman was asking some questions before the meeting, and we said, hang on. Asking about what signs can say, what they can't say, where we can step in, and where we have jurisdiction. As part of this process, we also solicited some feedback from local businesses and organizations. So, as you all are probably aware, there's been a lot of conversation at the county level about signage. So this conversation I think is important to have right now, just so we all are on the same page of what our ordinance says, but also some of the nuance that our team at City Hall goes through with the sign ordinance. Just creating a space for people to advertise, but not have it be over the top, and finding the sweet spot for everyone in this room. And then we'll open it up for some discussion about what we present, and then some different options that we have for signage in downtown and throughout Carver. So to start, this section of the code lives in the zoning ordinance. This is also important work. The planning commission is doing the code update, so this is a good first look at the sign ordinance to get some feedback from the council. So in general, there are things that our code says are important, or is important about signage. So signs should maintain general welfare of the community, should be safe for pedestrians and vehicles, should lead to an aesthetically attractive city, which is, of course, a little bit subjective. Balance legitimate business and development needs and sue free speech, which Dave will touch on quite a bit. Provide temporary signs in limited circumstance, so I'll talk a lot about our temporary sign ordinance. Prohibit some signs, and then fair, consistent enforcement of sign regulations. So how do we do that? Is that it's typically through a permitting process. So anytime a permanent sign comes into the city of Carver, comes in on a permit, so I review them depending on size and location. Then we also require a building permit. A sign permit is $60 in our fee schedule. Any sign that is in the downtown or the historic district requires a review by the HPC. So things like color, font, size are reviewed by the HPC. So anything downtown has that extra review. And then something you see around town a lot are monument signs. So the pretty neighborhood signs as you go into a neighborhood are included in development plans. So if it's of council interest, I can call out a preliminary plat where they have monument signs coming in, but I don't think that's typically something you're passionate about. So at that point, we see location, sign type, and materials. There are some signs that are allowed without a permit, which again, Dave is going to touch on most. So soon, campaign signs will likely be popping up, so those are allowed without a permit on your own personal property. Non-governmental traffic control signs, so if you have a temporary sign for a grad party saying this way to the grad party, this way to the garage sale. You can have one non-illuminated freestanding sign per property. It's not more than 12 feet. So throughout Carver, you'll occasionally see like the Chaska Hawk signs. Chaska Hawk football player lives here, and flags, which you can have without a permit.
Yeah, if I can jump into the other sort of non-governmental traffic control signs that are really common, or maybe in like a Target parking lot or McDonald's, where they'll say, you know, here's where you park for curbside pickup or things like that. I mean, signs that private businesses have that they put in their parking lot to control traffic and regulate where people go. So that's another really common reason for that exemption for those sorts of non-government, but yet traffic control signs.
And then general provisions in the sign code say that signs must be maintained. And we get some questions like the business lines, we had a couple questions about like illuminated signs. So if someone put up a sign that was like really flashy or had light pollution, so our code says that a sign can't be illuminated with intensity that will interfere with residents or occupants of adjacent properties. So thinking about development projects, if a commercial project comes in, we require a photovoltaic plan that shows where lights will be on the plan and where the light will move outside of the fixture. So we're able to make sure that light doesn't spill off a property, which would then be out of sync with our sign code, so.
Erin, can you say what that was, what kind of plan they have to submit?
Photovoltaic.
Like it just says like the voltage or
So it
like,
shows
I
where-
thought you said photo video at first.
No, it shows where a light post is, and then it's foot candles, it shows how bright the light will
Okay.
be directly under the light, and then as it moves out. So as part of the planning process, we always try to ensure that no light spillage happens onto an adjacent
Like
property.
on
We saw one for Carver.
Carver Place, yes.
Correct. Yes, you got it.
Circles around a stick.
That is, yes.
That's exactly what it is.
Boils down to. All right, I think the next one might be Dave's slide, it is.
Yes, so thank you, Mayor and Council, for talking through this with me tonight. So of course, signs have been interpreted by courts as a form of speech, which is protected under the federal constitution as well as the state constitution. And you can kind of roll through them if you want to put all the slides up on this one, you can, Aaron. So because of that, obviously governments, specifically local governments all the way up to Congress, if you will, cannot create laws that abridge the freedom of speech. So people have to have the ability to put things and communicate things that they believe in. And that really is a significant provision when it comes to regulating signs, because signs are viewed as a form of speech. So really with a few limited exceptions, cities have not much ability to restrict expression because of its message. That's always been the case. It's just a matter of how that language has been interpreted over time that I think is important to get into a little bit here tonight. And so the general rule, which I have on the bottom there, is that content-based sign regulations, so regulations that are focused on and look to the message on the sign rather than maybe the physical attributes of the sign, like size or distance from streets or other things. Those content-based regulations are presumed to be unconstitutional and are going to be problematic if you have provisions about that in your code.
So from one of my grad school classes, the way that it was helpful for me to remember is that we can think about the medium but not the message. So we can say what the sign looks like, so size, shape, etc., but we can't regulate what the sign says.
Can I ask a question about that?
Hmm?
So the FCC has regulations in place about profanity, vulgarity over the air broadcast, which is public domain.
Mm-hmm.
How is this different?
It's a good question. I'd probably need a communications lawyer in here to answer the FCC component to that. But generally speaking, governments are allowed to regulate obscenities, and a lot of that is where you get into the FCC regulations about over-the-air broadcasting and things that you can't put, presumably because children and other
Right.
people that you don't want seeing those things would have access to
You can
them.
say you hate somebody, but it's how you say it.
Right.
In public domain.
Right, well, and we've seen, especially over the course of the last 8 to 10 years, we've seen a lot of examples of political signs that have obscenities, curse words and other things. Cities have been pretty hands-off about telling people they can't have a sign up that says, F candidate A or whatever. I mean, those are things that come up often. You've probably seen many of those signs as you drive through Minnesota. They're out there. And when cities are asked about those signs or complaints come in, we have to be pretty candid and say, swear words alone aren't going to get you there. You can say those types of things on signs. It doesn't mean people aren't offended by them, but when it comes to sign regulations in municipalities, in terms of how far you can go, we've been very reluctant to tell people they have to remove those types of words from signs. So, for what it's worth.
Dave, can you also speak to, this isn't like specifically like the message, but it's also like who's creating the message, like whether it's the Catholic and the Lutheran Church having a pancake feed, or the Methodist Church in Chaska, like that can't be considered. Can you kind of expand on that?
Sure. Yeah, and cities have gotten into back themselves inadvertently into corners on this. I mean, when you start talking about freedom of speech and creating forums for people to express themselves, you can't decide which people you agree with, and you can express yourself, but you can't. One example, I think it was in Belle Plaine, is they put in a city park a war memorial in there that had some stuff in there that was religious, and that was deemed, and I think they were tied up in litigation for quite a long time, that was deemed to be a limited public forum that allowed freedom of speech. And so there were groups, I think, those that worshiped Satan and other types of things like that wanted to put things in the park as well, and said, well, if you can put a Christian memorial in the park, we can put our beliefs in the park. And it turned into quite a dispute, and eventually they, I think, ended up eliminating that public forum, but to do that they had to get rid of their war memorial, which was unfortunate. So I don't remember how that all turned out for them, but to Brent's point, it's not just the message, but once you allow certain things to go in certain areas, you can't discriminate or choose which messages you prefer or which messages you don't prefer. Now, there was a time, and I'll get into it with the next slide if you want to flip to it. So when courts look at sign ordinances before 2015, which I always feel like that was just recently, but now we're coming up on 10 years, a lot of city sign ordinances were not challenged because they were presumed valid. And what courts said was, we're really not going to tell cities how they can or cannot regulate signs unless there's proof, like actual evidence of when you're adopting these ordinances, that there's ill will or bad motives. Something like council members talking about how they don't want to allow a certain message, and that's maybe of public record because it's on a meeting recording or in the minutes, or vice versa. They were trying to create a provision that really favored something because they liked that form of speech or that position. If there was evidence of that, that's really what the hurdle was in order for people challenging a sign ordinance to prevail. But then in 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court decided a case it came out of Arizona. The town of Gilbert had imposed a number of restrictions on various types of signs based exactly on their content. Religious signs were called out specifically, political signs, ideological signs. You could have larger political signs or ideological signs than you could for temporary church services and things like that. So a church that actually didn't have a physical place to worship, it would have its weekly worshiping at various schools or other public locations that they would rent out throughout the community. They would put temporary signs up, and were limited in how big those signs could be, and they sued the city because the city sent them a couple of enforcement notices, told them they couldn't have signs up because they were too big, and they said, well, you can put political signs up or you can put ideological signs up that exceed that size. Why can't I put my signs advertising our weekly church services up? And there was back and forth. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the decision really changed the way that cities can regulate, because it effectively stated that if you have a content-based sign regulation, it's going to be presumed unconstitutional unless it passes an extremely high level of scrutiny, which is called strict scrutiny in constitutional law, which it's almost impossible for cities to meet that type of scrutiny when a judge or a court is looking at it. And so, I mean, those two bold bullet points at the end are generally the rules when it comes to content-based versus content-neutral. If it's content-based, then you have to look at the actual message to determine whether the regulation applies. It's probably going to be deemed unconstitutional, and so it's a problem. And if it's content neutral, related to things like size and shape or number of signs that you allow on property or types of signs or whether the sign's illuminated or things like that, physical attributes of the sign, it's generally going to be deemed constitutional as long as it's reasonably related to your desire to regulate signage in the city. You can point to some rationale for having that. It eliminates clutter if you want to limit the number of signs, or size-wise, it eliminates distractions from people driving by or other things. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can get from a regulation to a rational basis for the regulation, but those are the general rules after that Gilbert case that was decided about 9 years ago.
So what about like highway billboard, that you could regulate that based on size basically, and regardless of content and that kind of?
Yes, that's a good question, because there are cities, including Carver, that prohibits billboards. There are also cities that have some restrictions that really do require you to look at content. And that's really to my second sort of check box here on this slide. There's some leeway to regulate commercial messaging.
Okay.
And in fact, some cities simply put a restriction or a flat-out prohibition on off-premise signs, which are commercial signs that are intended to advertise for a business or some sort of commercial endeavor that takes place not on your property, but on someone else's property. So billboards fall into that category many times because they're usually not on the message on the billboard usually doesn't advertise for the person that actually owns that property or operates from that property. So in terms of best practices, I listed a handful here, which the reason I used the check mark when I was making this is because I did go through your code, the sign code, and Carver has, in my opinion, a pretty well-written sign ordinance right now from a constitutional standpoint. I feel like it was either written, drafted in a way that was very conservative before Reed was handed down in 2015, or maybe it was updated after 2015 to account for some of those decisions. But the first thing is you should always articulate a purpose and the reasons and the rationale for why you have these sign regulations. That is certainly at the beginning part of the ordinance. You want to avoid regulating based on content, of course, but as I mentioned after Reed's question, there is some leeway to regulate commercial messaging. You also want to try to keep your time, place, and manner limitations reasonable. To tell people they can't have any signs, I think would be a problem, right? And I think you could probably get a lot of political pushback on that too. But I think from a legal standpoint, that would be an issue because it just wouldn't seem reasonable that you could not have any signs on your property. You should always acknowledge, and our ordinance already does acknowledge 211B .045, which is the provision in state law that I think it's 45 days before the primary through a few days, maybe 10 days after the general election, that anybody can have as many non-commercial signs as they want all over their property. So that's why every once in a while you'll see people with, a yard full of political or election-related signs. Cities don't have any ability to regulate or prevent that due to that statute. A substitution clause is really important, and effectively what that means is you have a provision in your code that says if you can have a commercial sign on your property, you can substitute any sort of non-commercial message on that sign. The point of that is to make it crystal clear that nobody can have a commercial sign in Carver, but they couldn't replace that sign with a non-commercial message that they might want to use to communicate their beliefs or ideological values or whatever the case may be. A permit process, which I know Aaron already mentioned and we'll maybe talk a little bit more about tonight, is a good idea so that when people have questions or if they want to put up a new sign, rather than putting it up and having to deal with potential issues or enforcement problems, they have to come to the city with a sign permit application, submit maybe a depiction of the sign and explain where it's gonna go, what it's gonna look like, how big it is. And then staff can look at it on the front end so that we can tell them or communicate ahead of time whether there might be any issues. And then last, it's always good to have due process for permit applicants that might feel like the sign ordinance was either misinterpreted, misapplied, or other things like that. I think in the parentheses of that second to last bullet point, I said you want to really try to minimize staff discretion in sign ordinances, because just merely because your ordinance is content neutral or seems on its face to have very reasonable restrictions doesn't mean that when it's applied or in application, staff isn't doing anything that could be deemed problematic under the Constitution. And so you try to make it really as black and white as possible. Here's our requirements, you submit to us a permit, and staff really can look at the sign ordinance, look at your permit and your depiction, and decide very easily without looking at content or anything like that, whether you meet the standards. And so I think that's really important too.
So could you just do that substitution clause? So that's like if I have a giant sign that looks like something by my highway, I couldn't switch it from one thing to another, right? If I'm a commercial building, I have a large sign, I couldn't switch it with a billboard or something. Is that basically what we're saying?
No, so the point of the substitution clause would be, for example, Doghouse Bar has a sign right on the front, I'm looking at it here. That's obviously a sign that was either permitted under the code or maybe it was put up before the sign code existed, but my guess is having a sign on the front of your business like that is allowed. The point of the substitution clause is to say they can have a sign that's that big right on the front of their building. It currently advertises their business, but if they wanted it to say something like, some sort of political or ideological message, they could substitute their commercial message for the non-commercial message.
It's the other way around, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha, okay, thank you.
Just to take away an argument that Doghouse can have a sign advertising their business that's that big, but we can't, business B can't have the same size sign, maybe putting out some sort of message about something they really
Gotcha.
believe in.
Okay.
It's
Okay, that makes sense.
non-commercial. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So that's really I think I would characterize it as a very high level Constitution 101, maybe lesson about just signs when it comes to what cities can and can't do and sort of the changes that happened relatively recently and how the courts look at these things. It doesn't mean there isn't a little bit of leeway to regulate based on things like commercial messaging, but it's important to think about because a lot of times the questions that come up in the context of signage relate to, can we tell that person to take down their sign that says F this political candidate, or maybe has a message on their sign that the city doesn't agree with or members in the community are calling about because they don't agree with. It's important to kind of have some of this context in the back of your minds as we talk about the ordinance. So if you have any questions or if anything comes up while we're going through the rest of the discussion, feel free to chime in.
All right, so what our code says for different districts. So Central Business District is governed by the HBC, so any review goes through the city and both the HBC. So you can have one monument sign. Many businesses downtown fall under Category B, which is a wall sign or a canopy sign. Carver Creamery is there, that's technically a wall or a canopy sign. You can also have a rear door sign, and then if you have a canopy, you can have a sign under that as well. So sign was reviewed, they got a sign permit, went through HBC, good to go. A question we get quite a bit of feedback on is the Fleet Farm sign. I know that there were some negotiations of how that sign came to be, but there is some language in our code that applies to it. So one monument sign per zoning lot with frontage to Highway 212, which Fleet Farm obviously has to be part of a PCD or a planned commercial development district, has to be an accessory use, has to complement the building, some setback information. If the property is less than 6 acres, no monument sign may be permitted.
So there was some negotiation that took place, as I remember, with that. Has our code been updated to allow something that would be that tall?
So since it was part of a PCD, it was one of the negotiation pieces of it.
Okay,
But our sign
They want it
ordinance,
higher.
our sign ordinance allows that sign, it's a 40-foot tall sign, but then there is a carve out in the ordinance that allows like the apparatus of the sign to be larger, it's very unique,
So wait, the top of the silo,
essentially, yes.
So because it says Fleet Farm, that's 40 feet?
Correct. So we'd be maybe looking to clean that up when
Okay,
we
yeah.
dive back in.
Oh.
Why is 6 acres a magic number? Just was,
Just the pick,
okay. How many acres is Fleet Farm?
35.
Okay. How many acres, if we're looking at the lots that are kind of, what's the corner one right there on 212?
7-ish
7-ish, okay.
On the south side or the north side?
south.
Is there a possibility, like, if a business came in there, they would split that in half, or?
Yeah.
Okay, so that way we time, then they couldn't have a sign on 212.
It's not telling them they can't have a sign, it's saying like, it's like basically it's restricting how many 40-foot
Yeah.
signs they're gonna allow.
Per 6 acres, okay.
But is there any rationale for the 6 acres that you remember? I mean, you.
No.
Okay. Let's just plug that in.
I mean, there was at the time, but I would be lying to you if I would say like I remember what the rationale was.
Well, I mean, was it like a reactive thing, like, oh, we just had this happen, so we're gonna pick 6 acres now? Like, was there some real rationale?
I'm sure there was, I just can't, I couldn't regurgitate it right now.
And if you think about like the PCD process, it's a variation from a strict zoning code. So if that became something they wanted to discuss, it could be approved through a PCD, which is required for this as well, so.
So you're-
Yeah,
So you're saying in the PCD, we would basically give them a variance on it if we wanted to?
It's
I
not
mean,
a
could they-
variance, it's a PRD or a PCD process. So we would essentially write a new ordinance for that specific project that laid it out. So it would be, if it was Target, we would have an ordinance number specifically for that development that says Target and Target only can have this monument sign, even though their sign is less than 6 acres, which it never would be.
Right. Would that
So-
set us up for something though?
no, planned unit developments, in Carver, we call them planned commercial or planned residential developments, depending on what type of use it is, but effectively what that is contract zoning, where they say we want, the following, breaks from your zoning code, so we want maybe a setback reduction, we want an extra sign here or there, and in exchange for that, typically the city would say, well, then you have to provide more green space, or you have to maybe elevate the architecture on your buildings. It gives both sides the ability to be flexible with their rules and what they want from the beginning, to provide a way to sort of meet in the middle.
Okay.
And it's very common. I know, especially with signs, I mean, I know a lot of communities that do develop planned unit developments or planned commercial developments and allow extra signs as part of the give and take in exchange for maybe something that the city really wants, like a, enhanced wetland or some, you name it. It's something that you might feel you couldn't normally require out of a developer, but if they want a little flexibility from the city, you can maybe lean on them to do more. I know in one city, the Target is the nicest looking Target I've ever seen, and the reason their architecture on the outside of that Target building is so nice is because of the planned unit development process and the fact that they wanted some breaks.
Erin, I have a question on that second one. What makes it an accessory use?
There needs to be a principal building there too, so you couldn't have.
Just like not a coming soon or
Right.
not a, okay.
All right, so general commercial and freeway commercial, so thinking about Carver Square, it's zoned this way. So 1 monument sign per zoning lot. This is tricky since so much of that site is parking lot, so many of them have wall signs. So if the building is 100,000 square feet or more, it's approved as part of a PCD and can vary from the section. If it's less, the wall sign shall be permitted on street frontage and entrance facade. So Mizzy's can have a sign over their door and on the back side of their building because it has street frontage to Dahlgren. Carver
They can?
They can, yes. Carver Dental can have a sign over their entrance door and on JCP because they have JCP frontage. So thinking about street frontage is important there.
So we're talking about the monuments, so is that why we see the monuments and then they say like the names of the businesses are all in there because it's just one?
Yes, you
Okay.
got it.
Okay.
Continuing on, just some more sections of the code for that same district. You can have a menu board or drive-through, which Carver Square doesn't have. Monkey and Hometown Bank will be our first drive-through facility, so they'll need to meet that requirement. One rear door sign not to exceed 4 square feet, and then one under canopy sign, really similar to downtown. So downtown central business district and general commercial have some of the same guiding principles to our sign ordinance, even though they're in pretty different locations of town.
Help me understand, okay, so 4 feet on the rear for a sign, that's not,
On the rear door.
oh, on the rear door, okay.
Industrial Lakeview is a really good example of industrial signage, so they have a monument sign. They could have 2 per entrance, can't exceed 10 feet in height, can't be within 20 feet of public right-of-way, can't exceed 64 square feet. They can have a secondary monument for each structure, so we talk occasionally about Lakeview's maybe potential for a second building. They could have a second entrance sign there. And then they may have the wall sign and then a door or wall sign above of 4 square feet for each tenant.
Oh, sure, that makes sense.
Ag and residential districts, this really comes into play with the subdivision signs. So the Timber Creek monument is here. You can have 2 signs per entrance into any subdivision, can exceed 10 feet in height or 32 square feet in area. So something to think about is that the 32 square feet in area, we just consider the sign face. We don't consider the structural elements of it. So like the Spring Creek neighborhood sign is pretty big, so the brick area around it doesn't account toward that. Prohibited signs, so temporary signs is the biggest one, the one that we'll focus on.
Aaron, I have to ask you another question. Did we say 1 entrance sign for a commercial? Per entrance? Because why are we allowing 2 on residential but only 1 on commercial, or am I not understanding this? Because it says, with the Lakeview one, we had 2 primary monument signs, oh, it is 2 per entrance. Why do we have 2 per entrance? Do they only have 1 though?
Lakeview just has 1, yeah.
Okay, why would we have, I don't think it was rational why we would have 2.
If it's a big facility.
I think a lot of times,
But per
an entrance might mean a shared driveway, there could be a Lakeview on one side and maybe another, company and
Multi-tenant.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I'm just trying to think through it too.
Maybe it looks
Maybe
like
it's a good
this,
question.
so that you can see it coming from this way and this way.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, it just seems excessive to have 2 at an entrance. I mean, at each entrance to have 1, it makes sense, but I mean, we could end up with a lot of entrance signs, okay.
Okay, so prohibited signs, temporary signs are what we're going to focus on, so I have some more slides. Roof signs, signs with dynamic displays, swinging signs, rotating signs, pylon signs, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a couple that I really want to focus on. Signs occupying parking spaces, and then signs within the public right of way. So you'll see the last one there is billboards, so they
We have-
talked about that earlier.
We have swinging signs on this one. What are, like Carver, Creamery, the Dog House, Lisa's?
Those are called, we had a name for
Canopy.
those.
You know, because I mean, they could be called canopy, but that wouldn't make sense in my
It's
brain.
it's the same sign, I think that we talked about when Strains wanted to put it up. The kind that kind of hangs over the
So if you
sidewalk.
look at the Dog House
and
right now,
swings.
yeah, like you can see that it
Yep.
sticks out and swings.
There's
Lisa's has one,
a-
Creamery has one.
We have a name for it, I can find it. Well, Aaron continues if you want.
So you'll see on the screen now that there are signs throughout the community on any given day that are prohibited in our sign code that happen. So things like a community fish fry, great. We all want everyone to go and support the fish fry. But it's tricky because that sign is located in the city's public right of way. Randall Anderson is breaking the rules there with the preserve sign, those are in the public right of way. And then signs pop up throughout town all the time. So it ranges from garage sale to new business open to need a fence, basement finishers, egress windows. We could go
Nice.
on and on, yeah. So some examples of where they are throughout town, and frankly, this is the most challenging part of our sign code, I would say, for staff, is that we attempt to be supportive of these groups and we want these things to be happening in town, but technically, all of these signs are prohibited from our city code. So just keep that in mind as we continue the conversation, think about the signs around town as we continue to try to navigate this portion of the code.
The swinging sign it's called in the code an under canopy sign. So it's a sign that's suspended below the ceiling or roof of a canopy or marquee, but it's perpendicular to the face of the building. So it's sort of sticking
Even
out.
though nothing overhangs it, it's still called a canopy.
Under canopy,
Under
yeah,
canopy.
yeah, it's a confusing definition, but it includes more than just things that are under a canopy.
Okay, so then what does swinging sign mean?
Do we have that term in the code as
Yeah,
well?
it's a prohibited sign, probably as a
Okay.
definition, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure yeah, we can pull the definition up and answer that question.
Okay, so temporary signs are the big one for us. So temporary signs, this is straight from our city code, shall be permitted beginning 6 a.m. Wednesday through 9 p.m. on the following Sunday. I suspect that this portion of the code was for the temporary shops downtown, that businesses could say, we're open this weekend, Carver General, come on down. Just some more general things about the sign size. The biggest thing, the sign shall be located outside of the public right-of-way, except in the central business district, where it can be located in the public right-of-way, provided the signs are not placed within street or parking spaces. Then jumping down to number 5 is the tricky part. That sign must have permission from the underlying property owner, so it can be on someone's property, but they have to have permission from the person who owns the property. Talks a little bit about A-frame signs to make sure we're not blocking the sidewalk, and then temporary signs shall be permitted within any zoning district. So, we got some feedback from a couple business owners, a member of a local sports group that does some signage throughout town. Some of the feedback we got is that they came to us asking some questions and they didn't realize that our sign ordinance existed. So they asked us some questions to say, can I put signs here, here, and here? And when I said no, because it was in public right of way, they got a little bit testy of like, the city doesn't support this organization. What do you mean? I see signs here all the time. So that is tricky. Enforcement has been tricky. So we want to be, have good relationships with the business community. So if a small business owner spends 2 hours on a Tuesday night putting out 100 signs for their sale downtown, going out and plucking them first thing Wednesday morning can be seen as the city not being supportive of that small business. We got some feedback about fair treatment across groups. So there's a lot of, why can you have farmers market signs, signs for the bike rodeo, the open house, the Lions, the Steamboat Days, but not my private group that says baseball tryouts are this weekend. So looking for fair treatment across groups. One of the people we got feedback from suggested that we allow permitting within parks if the sign is not detrimental to traffic. And then some more feedback was that we need to consider the bump outs throughout downtown. So prior to downtown being reconstructed, the streets, the sidewalk adjacent to the building, you had to get permission from that property owner still. But now those bump outs feel like they are claimed, in this example, by Harvey's and the Carver Creamery. So suddenly they have a lot more real estate for their signage, where businesses that only have the 6 or 8 foot sidewalk in front of them don't have as much real estate. And with the diagonal parking downtown, you won't see signs there, but if it's on the bump out, you can see that sign obviously. So some feedback asking us to consider the bump outs throughout downtown. How do those fall within the sign code? What can we do to allow more businesses to use the bump outs? So there's some scenarios that we want to talk about. So I will say, we'll turn a blind eye occasionally on some signs if they're new and it's a local business and we know that it's a group that's looking to get off the ground. So we have one that says pie shop open downtown. Great. That's fantastic for a couple days. But what would it mean if instead of the pie shop, it was the new bar downtown, or?
Well, if it's Super Runs 24/7, they should really advertise that for a long time. Who made that?
Christy comment of all comments.
So pie shop, great, supported by people young and old. 2 for ones might have a limited audience. But just some feedback that we got.
24/7, they're open a lot.
They are open a lot. Just looking for some feedback about signs in the right of way. Do we take them all? Is it important? Is there some cadence that you want us to do it at? Right now, the building inspections team, whenever signs start to pop up, they go and do a sweep. They'll take all of the signs that they see that are in the public right of way or on city property or in parks. We'll keep them here at City Hall for a little while. If someone wants to come and pick them up, that's great. They typically don't, and we dispose of them a while later after. We've had them for a little bit. I will say people are also a little bit tricky on us, is that they zip tie a lot of them to like our stop signs, which is fine and we can still get them, but it makes it a little bit trickier if someone's just out there trying to pull the signs really quickly. So I know there's probably some differing feedback about small businesses, if we want them to be able to advertise in this way or not, but just looking for some council feedback. This is by far the trickiest part of the sign ordinance for us. at the moment.
But there's business and then there's event too, because obviously we'll talk about Steamboat Days here in a second and things like Lions and that, but do you want to start with, or is it all one?
Let's start here, just because this one is
Yeah.
the trickiest one, and we'd be looking for feedback on it.
But I think like that's a great question, because like based on what Dave said, like the city can't base its judgment on whether it's an event or a business, and so
Or whether it's a non-commercial message or a business or a temporary event, all those things. I mean, that's the issue, right? If, I think the direction that staff is in need of really relates to, do you want to allow those signs in the right of way to the extent maybe they don't create a safety issue, right? Because there are situations when signs cannot be placed in a right of way because it's going to create, it's going to block views, or it's going to be too close to the shoulder, or they're going to, snow plows are going to have issues. But if you're going to allow it, I think it's important to understand that we can't be looking at content when we talk about what we want to allow and what we don't want to allow. I mean, right now we do allow, our code allows for certain signs in the central business district to be located within public right-of-way under various conditions, but we have to also keep in mind that that only assumes that the property owner is okay with it. And the reason for that is because this part of the scope of right-of-way authority, the city has right-of-way to build streets, to put in public infrastructure, but as part of that scope, you don't have the ability to tell people they can put signs for private businesses in there. So if the adjacent property owner is not okay, who owns that property in fee, subject to the city's easement, if the adjacent property owner is not okay with those signs being in front of their property or on their property, the city can't tell them, well, you have to allow it. And we get a little nuance there and into the weeds on some things, but that was a discussion that we had when we talked about some of the signs that were being placed, in the public right-of-way here on Broadway, maybe a handful of months back or last summer.
and just one piece that as we get larger, this I think in the past it's, and I'm part of the problem, I would say, or not problem, but like I encouraged it with the team is like, yeah, that'll be fine, even though like we know like maybe like the chapter and verse of the ordinance would prohibit it, but we're very quickly running into people saying, because they can see these signs, well, that sign's up, why not this sign? So, this is an important conversation for us to understand what the council wants, memorialize that in an ordinance, and then enforce it without gray areas, just to say like, nope, this is the ordinance, and go from there, because we're running into scenarios that Erin described that don't put her and her team in the best position, since Erin's team is the one enforcing the sign ordinance.
If you don't mind me
Yeah, no, go
adding
ahead.
one
Go
thing,
ahead.
Mayor, the only other thing too that, and we don't have anyone from Public Works, we have the interim Public Works Director here, I guess, but if there were folks that are maintaining streets and are looking at how signs affect the streets and sight lines and other things, I promise you, they would say the best rule is not to allow them in public right-of-way, maybe except for in the certain circumstances like we allow in the central business district, just because once you start allowing that, then you have staff having to make decisions about, well, is that a safety issue? Is that gonna screw up our plow trucks? Is that gonna be in the way when we're pushing snow and doing things? Or, you also have a lot of grass in the right-of-way that the city, I assume, maintains and mows. Once you have signs there, it's just gonna slow them down. They're gonna have to do their job differently, because before they go mow, they're gonna have to pull a bunch of signs or move signs, and then do they have to put them back? So I think that, I think that's important to keep in mind, because to me, you run into a lot of concerns from a public safety standpoint, and just an ability to get a lot of the day-to-day stuff done when you're maintaining right-of-way, when you allow for physical things like signs to be put in the right-of-way and in the boulevard.
I'm gonna change my tune and say let's get through the slides so we can just do the discussion, because I think we're gonna bleed over on time, if that works for you.
Yeah.
So scenario one, pie shop versus new bar downtown. Another one that we see, City Hall, someone rents Village Hall for a pancake breakfast, great. 9 until 11, no problem, we typically allow this to happen. What happens if it says church service from 9 to 10 on a Sunday? Where's that separation of events that are allowed versus something that could be seen as problematic by resident XYZ? And then the third scenario, just the frequency of them. So we see a lot of garage sale signs and we typically leave those up until the event. So like Christy was saying, treating event signs differently. Do we let the event signs last until the event? Is there some type of permitting that someone could get a temporary sign, but then they're responsible to come back and pick the signs back up, which we all know would happen every single time.
So we could treat those differently, or we cannot? Because I thought we can't.
I suppose we,
Not the messaging, but you could allow the concept, but you wouldn't be able to, I mean, temporary signs for anything could be.
So it would have to be a temporary business sign, the same as a rummage sale, the same as a Courtney Johnson welcomes you to the city of Carver sign, or whatever.
Mhm.
It's temporary.
As long as
And the one we'll have to get into too is, you know, like, no parking parade Sunday for SEMO days, but we'll go on to that, so.
so those are the three scenarios. I think it's probably good if we just start the discussion. We don't start it here, we start it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say, like, to your point, the city can put in temporary, like, traffic signage related to events and such within the right of way.
Okay. Good, Harvey, you're gonna have to be out there.
I was gonna say,
But
take
you're
that
like
off
a
the
rest
list.
hall.
Okay, so we will put a pin in this, as they say, and hold this until the meeting. Okay, do you wanna do city manager's report?
He was looking up one thing though for swinging sign.
Yeah, I did find the definition of that. It's weird, it's a hinge sign installed on an arm or spar and which is not also permanently fastened to an adjacent wall or upright pole. So it almost
Like
be
a
like.
real estate sign, swinging.
Yeah, but I feel like that's on an upright pole, isn't it? So I don't know, I even Googled swinging sign and the pictures were not helpful, so. So I'm not sure.
So we're
what
not
was-
sure what that means
No,
exactly?
no.
So maybe that's a good opportunity to
Maybe not have it in
take
there.
that out.
Yeah.
So a couple of updates for the council. Kathy Elke has announced her retirement, so kind of bittersweet, happy that she's going to be able to enjoy some more free time, but really sad to see her go. She's been instrumental in a lot of things that we do on a daily basis, and this kind of makes up a key social fabric, I think, of the office. So, and we're gonna miss her treats. So hopefully,
Yeah.
And her costumes.
and her costumes.
Mm-hmm.
So her last day will be July 24th. Also, know that Lynn is getting ready to start advertising for her replacement in that position.
Will the position look the same?
Yes. The League of Minnesota Cities is holding their annual conference in Rochester this year from June 26th through 28th. So traditionally, the mayor and various members of staff have gone. We've tried to limit, although we could, there's some cities that do, but we've tried to limit it to one other council member just so we don't have to post for a quorum. And so I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, Lori went,
2 years ago.
and then Eric went last year. So just wanted to kind of, I don't know if Christy or Reed are interested, or if you want to draw straws, but I think the mayor intends to go as a member of the league board.
Is that over a weekend or is that?
It starts, yeah.
Say that again?
It's,
Wednesday.
it's, the heavy part of the conference is Thursday, Friday, but it fundamentally starts on Wednesday.
And then do you pay, does the city pay for hotel and mileage, or just hotel?
Everything.
Okay, but can we technically can send 2 people if Reed and I just couldn't come to an agreement, we wanted to go.
You can, it's just, it gets to be kind of clunky. Like there's a city that sends their whole council, but I think, not judging that community, I just think it creates some appearances that I'm not sure the council wants to have a quorum, because you would unintentionally or be sitting at tables and talking about issues. I defer to Dave if he felt differently.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's an open meeting law issue because there's the exception about going to conferences, as long as the topic isn't dealing with official city business. But to Brent's point, it does sometimes create perception issues. And when you're sitting at a table with your fellow council members, what do you have in common but the city of Carver? So naturally, it's hard not to talk about things. But if a quorum wanted to attend, we could make it work legally. It's not a problem. It sounds like that's just been the city's practice to try to avoid that issue. But I think it's doable if there's heavy interest.
I would, in deference to the council, I would suggest they would probably start with most senior council member, then go to Reed, then back to Lori, and then Eric, and then around, based on availability and interest. But that's I don't know if that's something you are able to decide tonight.
No, I would have to look at my
No?
calendar.
Okay.
Is there for like an early registration deadline, there's typically a discount, early bird?
I think there might be.
There is an early bird registration.
Speed round, or you wanna?
Oh, I can finish, so maybe we can loop back on that on the first. Monthly water report, so we have our second report in there, but you're looking for council feedback, and we can do this in the regular session of like, there are many ways and approaches you can take related to that. And so we've talked about different pieces, looking to get council feedback on what you want that to look like and how you want that tool, the communication tool to be used. 212 bridge railing update, so we're expecting that to go up sometime in March. So they promised to send a picture before it goes up at kind of a week notice, so we can put that out there. We've only had one application for a seasonal employee, so if you know of any folks that are looking to get out there and enjoy the summer on a lawnmower, we'd love to get to know them. We've asked the engineering office, just based on some concern shared by the Public Services Department, to look at parking on Spring Creek, Jorgensen, Ash, and Hickory. Some of those streets have like intermittent no parking signs on one side, some don't, and then especially on these downtown streets, if parking is done on both sides, it can get really tight. So Schmidt is checking on minimum widths for parking, and going to prepare a report that I'd like to have the city council take a look at. And then one of the outgrowths of our emergency management plan that we're looking at locally is we've really never used this model of an acting city manager. It's if I'm down or away, I'm just available by text or phone during those times that I happen to be taking a break on a vacation where I will be out of pocket. And so Lynn is going to be the acting city manager. So starting Wednesday through the 1st, if you need something, if there's any kind of action related to the city manager's position, Lynn's going to be taking that. So feel free to text her, call, or email her. But I won't be available from Wednesday through the 1st.
All right,
Early bird is May 3rd.
can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
And a second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye.